Thank you for tuning into this video on the elements of crime. And we're going to focus in on two specific major elements of crime that are important for every lawyer to try and prove happened. And these are things that, legally speaking, we're looking at existing in a crime. And both of them are Latin words, so both are certainly, they have origins that go further back to law, that these elements should be there. And the first element of a crime, and it kind of seems obvious in many ways, is called the Actus Reyes. And the Actus Reyes is the actual criminal act. In order to charge someone with a crime of burglary, you have to actually have a burglary. It can't just be someone was thinking of stealing something in their brain and didn't actually make any action towards it. So you have to have that actual physical act of the criminal act, the Actus Reus. So someone has to have actually done this guilty or prohibited act or taken steps towards it. And that's going to be a key thing that as a lawyer you have to prove actually happened. If you're trying to prove that somebody murdered someone, you have to show that they were the one that acted in that way, that they contributed to the death of that individual. You can't just say, we think they were involved without having any evidence showing that they were part of that criminal act. Now, of course, this must be voluntary, and we'll go into some issues where it may not be voluntary later on in this unit. As certainly there could be some instances where someone is forced to commit a crime, which we'll get into later on. Now, not always is it someone committing a crime necessarily by doing something. Sometimes you can commit a crime just by not doing something. For example, in the state of Wisconsin, we have a lot of Good Samaritan laws where you have to help someone in need, potentially if they're hurt. But there also are things like mandatory reporting, where teachers are, for example, mandatory reporters, doctors are mandatory reporters, police officers are mandatory reporters, and if they see any signs of like child abuse, they have to report that. So they have special reporting procedures to report that to the people in charge, essentially, of looking into that, to social workers and to the police departments. So mandatory reporting is a thing that you could essentially get in trouble with the law for not doing something because it's mandatory for you to report something. Also, another example of a crime if you don't do something is, let's say you're in a lifeguard or in some profession where it's your job to like save someone in a situation. If someone's drowning in the pool and you're a lifeguard and you choose not to save them, that is a crime. You didn't do anything and it still was a criminal act. And certainly there's a whole lot more other things. For example, let's say a doctor has assumptions that you might be sick with some sort of disease and they just don't tell you. That's them not doing something, and it's technically a crime. There's plenty of times where not doing something is actually considered a crime, and plenty of times where doing something is a crime. So you could have it either way. And probably one of the most controversial areas is trying to determine when something actually becomes a crime. If somebody's planning a bank robbery and they got like blueprints at their house and instructions on what they and their team are going to do, does that count as the actual bank robbery if you capture them early in the act before they've ever entered the premises of the bank? Well, that could be tough. If they've taken any steps towards it, though, that means they could be charged with that crime. So just the planning, those blueprints and the instructions for their team could be considered actually committing the crime. And this is something that's often used against like terrorists that are caught earlier on in the act, or different people that are planning some sort of major crime. Oftentimes they'll have some sort of evidence linking and showing that they've been planning or taking steps towards that criminal activity. Now, one aspect is the criminal act. The other aspect that you're looking for is what's called the mens rea. So you have the actus reus and the mens rea. And the mens rea is the mental state or the intent of the whole situation. You're looking for someone that, meant to commit the crime, not someone that necessarily, maybe they committed a crime on accident or didn't know any better or any number of other things that could come up. So you're looking for their purposefulness. You're looking for them to knowingly commit this. And there are some times where um, mens rea can be proved in different ways. For example, you could prove that someone was negligent. You've probably heard of negligent or negligence at some point in time, and this is failure to exercise a standard of care or not being aware of the risks in their situation. I think of it as, like, let's say, negligent behavior is not following proper procedure. So there's an example of a man in California that was building a cannon. And he was building a cannon to kind of display and show all his friends. He wanted it to be a real working cannon that he could use. And one day when he was messing around with it, it accidentally went off. It accidentally went off, killing his girlfriend. Now, this wasn't something intentional. He didn't knowingly, go out of his way to kill his girlfriend, but he wasn't taking the proper care to make sure that that cannon was safe, to make sure that it was not armed, to make sure no one was around that could get hurt. So he was found negligent in the act. He may not have, purposefully, killed his girlfriend, but he was negligent. He wasn't taking the proper standard of care. And you could also think of this as like negligent maintenance of a vehicle. If your vehicle, if you're being negligent in keeping it up and it causes some sort of accident, you could be held responsible because you did not take you failed to exercise a standard of care. Now, this is a little different from the next term, which is called recklessness, and you often hear about like vehicular recklessness or recklessness, driving in a reckless behavior. And recklessness is all about you know, having no regard for possible injuries you may cause in some sort of activity. For example, let's go back to the guy with the cannon in California. If he hadn't just been doing maintenance and had it accidentally go off, let's say he was doing this. Let's say he loaded the cannon, he lit it, and then he spun it around to see what would happen. That would be seen as reckless. He's doing something that could clearly cause injury or death to other people. Now, is he like shooting cannons at people he doesn't like? No. So it's not maybe as heinous or horrible as that kind of act, but it is still reckless behavior. He's doing something that we all know can cause harm, that can cause injury. And let me give you some more examples of, negligence versus recklessness. Let's say a man is eating M&Ms in his car and he spills them all over his car. And he wants to eat them, so he reaches down to grab them throughout the passenger side of the vehicle. While doing so, he crashes. He crashes his car. Is that negligence or recklessness? Well, that would be negligence. He's not taking the standard of care that he's supposed to be with driving that vehicle. He's not paying attention to the road. He's being very negligent, kind of like texting while driving, except he was reaching for all those M&Ms. Now, it would be recklessness if he was like, "Hey, I'm going to throw all these M&Ms throughout my car and see how fast I can eat them before I ever have to worry about it." Or I always think of recklessness as like a game of chicken. If you're negligent, you're not like driving at another vehicle. But recklessness might be, "Hey, I'm going to see how long I can stay in this lane going straight towards the truck before I hit the brakes." So negligence and recklessness can be very different things. And it's important to realize the difference between those because you'll be receiving some scenarios that relate heavily to negligence or recklessness. Let's think about this question, though. How about an accomplice? What if someone helps another person commit a crime? Should they be charged with it? Because certainly there's a lot of laws out there that would count that. Let's say you help someone obtain blueprints for robbing a bank. Should you be held as a bank robber? If you help someone build that cannon that blows up and hurts someone else, should you be held responsible for that crime as well? And different states have different laws on this, counting an accomplice as someone as a criminal as well. And we've seen that in class in some of our examples. So be wary that accomplices can certainly play a role in determining whether or not they're a crime.